Well, good afternoon, folks. My name is Jonathan Techmeyer. I'm the Associate Coordinator Communications for the Alberta Teachers Association. The Alberta Teachers Association acknowledges Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories within Alberta. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, including the many places that you are joining from. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. Thank you for joining us. We are here today to hear a response from the Alberta Teachers Association in regards to this morning's statement from Education Minister Adriana LaGrange about efforts to split the association and remove its professional functions. I am joined by ATA President Jason Schilling and ATA Executive Secretary Dennis Theobald. I just want to note that the Executive Secretary has the legislated mandate in the Teaching Profession Act to oversee the ATA's professional, regulatory, discipline and conduct functions. And so he'll be available to answer some of the more technical and legal and process questions associated. Mr. Schilling will start with a prepared statement, and then we'll get to your questions. If you would like to be entered into the queue for the questions, please use the raise hand function, which you can find towards the bottom of your screen underneath the share screen button. We will take the questions in the order that they're received. We'll take one question and then a follow-up, and then we'll move to the next questioner. However, if you have additional questions, please re-raise your hand, and once we get through the queue, we can go back and answer any questions that remain at that point as well. I think that's all that you should have received a news release already from Mark Milne. So if you haven't, you can email Mark Milne, mark.milne@ata.ab.ca, and he can get that to you. Or if you have any follow-up questions afterwards or separate questions, please send them through to Mark Milne. At this point, I'll turn it over to President Jason Schilling.
Good afternoon, everyone. The ATA will not allow Adriana LaGrange's threats and intimidation to be a distraction. The minister's plans to split Alberta's teaching profession would serve to completely destabilize and dismantle one of the best performing public education systems in the world. The MLA for Red Deer North was handed a golden opportunity to lead one of the world's top performing jurisdictions when it comes to K-12 education. Instead of supporting it and fostering it, she has delivered nonstop attacks intended to weaken and destabilize it. This is simply put as a sad effort to distract from her own inability to handle the education of file. Experience has taught me that when you speak truth to power to this government over the things that they've done, the response is to attack. We've seen them attack doctors, attack nurses, attack parents, and they attack teachers, and they attack public education. I invite Albertans to join us in stopping this government from continuing this destructive path. Devastating funding cuts and a completely disastrous curriculum and a COVID-19 response that was completely negligent in protecting Alberta families have driven our education system to a point of crisis. It's appalling that the government would choose this time in the middle of a pandemic to make this attack on our teachers. We've said for over 18 months that teachers are exhausted and they feel completely abandoned in their efforts to manage the pandemic in schools. Teachers were begging for support, and instead, this minister chooses to attack them and their association. This attack takes things to a new level, though. But if the minister follows through with her destructive plan to splinter the teaching profession, Alberta's education system will crater. The teaching profession has a long history of being unified and collegial, and today's most recent threat will rip the profession apart and jeopardize the stability of education in our schools. Adriana LaGrange is spinning a 15-year-old discipline case as cover for this vindictive attack on teachers. In this case, only one party did the job it was supposed to do, and that was the Alberta Teachers Association. As a result of our process, this teacher was removed from the profession and never taught again. I need to point out that the government of Alberta itself failed to report the case to police when it received the report of the teacher's conviction of unprofessional conduct in the ATA disciplinary hearing. The minister wants to take over the discipline teacher file, but the government's own processes are completely devoid of transparency, and they include recent cases of superintendents and private school teachers who've been allowed by the Minister of Education to abuse people and to continue in the profession. All of this is very vindictive and disingenuous. Sadly, it seems to be common fare for this government. It is meant to distract Albertans from all the ways that this minister is dismantling public education in Alberta. This is why teachers and an increasing number of Albertans have no trust in this minister or this government's agenda for education. Teachers, parents, and Albertans are prepared to stand for education. In the coming weeks and months, we will be meeting with teachers across the province to prepare them for this, and we will vigorously fight this legislation from now until the day it is introduced and every day that the legislature is sitting. I'm calling for Albertans to join us. As a teacher, I believe in public education. I believe in my colleagues, and I believe in my students. And I also know that when you believe in something, then you must fight for it. And this will be a long, hard fight, but we're ready for it. I'm now willing to and happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Jason. And again, we can direct questions to either President Schilling or Executive Secretary Dennis Theobald. If you have a question for either of our guests, please use the raise hand function, which you can actually find under either the reactions or possibly the participants tab at the bottom of your screen. Again, we'll do one question followed by a follow-up from each reporter before moving through the list. And our first question is from Janet French with CBC. Janet, go ahead.
Hi there. Question is for Jason. So you had said, and I'm going to look up your exact words, that if this split proceeds, then it will lead to Alberta's public education system crumbling. What makes you say that?
Well, thank you for the question, Janet. You have to consider that the association and the profession in Alberta is unified and collegial. Everybody is under one umbrella of the Alberta Teachers Association if they work in public, francophone, or separate schools. If you were to all of a sudden split the association into a union and a college, you've now fractured the profession. And we've seen in other jurisdictions where often the union and the college are at odds with one another. We don't want to see that here in Alberta. We have a long history going back decades of a unified profession working towards the betterment of education in this province. And we don't want to see a dismantling of that happen and causing more chaos or confusion within our schools in our province.
Follow up, Janet?
Yeah, I assume there you're referring to what happened with the BC, the long dead BC Teachers College and the way that shook down. But I mean, nurses, for example, have a separate regulator. Doctors have a separate regulator. Would you describe those professions as ununited? I just don't see how you're making the connection between the way that a profession is regulated and the unanimity of a profession to stand up for a system they believe in.
No, I'm not making that reference that other professions would not be unified in the way that they are working towards things that they believe in. But what you have here with the association is an organization that has worked very hard to keep separate union, regulatory, and professional functions, and to work and create structures within our own system that keep them separate so that we can also advocate for the profession, but also hold our profession to account when it comes to the regulatory and the conduct and the competency of those teachers. We want to keep something that has been working well for decades to continue to work.
Thanks. And I believe Dennis Theobald has more to respond on this question as well.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. As you rather indicated in the preface, the history in British Columbia is not necessarily a happy one. And it's fairly typical of what you see when you have a teachers' union and a teachers' college created separately. You basically have a union that is interested solely in its own members, and which regards the college as being hostile. And you have a college that does not necessarily enjoy the support of the people who belong to the profession that it is intended to regulate. I think that one of the really critical things is that the government, in pursuing this short-sighted agenda for political reasons, risks destroying a culture that has grown up over the course of decades since 1935, where the Alberta Teachers Association has been engaged both in advancing the interests of members, but also in protecting the public interest. And the thing about culture is that once it's destroyed, it's very difficult to reconstruct.
Thank you, Dennis. We're going to go to Tom Ross next, 660. Tom Ross.
Hi, I don't know if this question is best for Dennis or Jason, but can you go more into the actual investigative process with Michael Gregory, and were there any mistakes made back then, or did it expose any gaps in the investigative process for the ATA?
So I'll start off by noting that, just given the length of time that has passed, there's less detail about the investigative process. There's a lot of information in regards to the hearing and the hearing report. And I think it's best that we go to Dennis Theobald to speak on these matters.
So thank you. The invitations talk a little bit about the process. So why don't I do that? One thing that is notable is that the process hasn't actually changed that much, even though this particular case is 15 years old. So the process is initiated by a complaint. So when an individual, and they can be another teacher, they can be a member of the public, any person, it can be a school superintendent or a principal, any person has a concern about the professional conduct of a teacher, and they communicate that concern to the executive secretary, that concern will be investigated. All complaints are investigated. So in the case of Gregory, we know that the investigation took place. We have some of the investigator's notes. We also know that the investigator was aware that the RCM police had knowledge of and concern about Gregory. Once the investigation is conducted, if there is an indication that unprofessional conduct may have taken place, the matter is then referred to a hearing committee, professional conduct committee. And that committee, which is not within the political control of the association, it's independent, hears the facts and renders its decision as well as a recommendation on penalty. And that's what happened in this case. The penalty, as far as the Alberta Teachers Association is concerned, is limited to the membership status of the teacher involved. We can take away membership. What we cannot do is we cannot take away certification. That responsibility resides exclusively with the Minister of Education. In keeping with the established process that remains in place even today, the association communicated the results of the hearing, provided the hearing report, and indicated its decision to the Minister of the day, Mr. Zwozdesky. Mr. Zwozdesky reviewed the report and concurred with the association's recommendation and suspended Gregory's certification.
Tom, a follow-up question?
Sorry,
Dennis.
There was one other piece, and that was, did we make mistakes? Have things changed? In terms of the process, I think that the process was absolutely adhered to and was conducted properly. What has changed is that in the last 15 years, standards have evolved. And certainly every regulatory organization is concerned with that. It's one of the reasons why we were engaged in active discussions with the government prior to the introduction and passage of Bill 85, because we want to see improvements to the discipline process, not only for us, but also for the minister. who has aspects of this that are under her exclusive control. Remarkably, even though Bill 85 was introduced within the last few weeks and passed, there was no discussion whatsoever of the measure that was taken today.
And a follow-up, Tom?
Yeah, and maybe this one is more for Jason too, but on that last point that Dennis made there, does this show that maybe there is room for some more collaboration, more discussion, honest, fulsome discussion with the province over just how to make this process better for everyone involved?
It's a great question, Tom. And the association's always been willing to sit down with this government or any government of the day to discuss education policies or matters that they might want to talk about. But what we've seen from this government and from this minister is a constant and consistent and persistent dismissal of the association and what they have to say, often dismissed as just the teachers union or a special interest group. They do not actively in an authentic manner engage with in conversations with the association. I've always been open to sitting down with the minister and having conversations about things. That is not always reciprocated on the other end.
Our next question comes from Graham Thompson. Graham, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I got to ask the question, are you surprised by this? This move? It seems to me, and I've been watching Kenny for some time, and like go back 3, 4, 5 years ago, he was telegraphing he'd move against the ATA. So I was wondering if you are surprised at all by their move to try and dismantle the ATA into 2 different bodies.
I'm not surprised by it. I'm extremely disappointed and frustrated by it. Right now, we have teachers in classrooms working during a pandemic and doing everything possible to keep an education system afloat without a lot of support from this government and this ministry. We have seen a brutal 4th wave come through our province and through our schools, and not a lot of support come from a government around that, to the point where teachers have said to me they do not feel supported by this government. So to see this move by government today during a pandemic, to me, is politicizing something that should never have been politicized, and it seems petty to me. And I'm extremely disappointed that the government would make this move right now without even sitting down and engaging in a decent, authentic conversation with the profession about the concerns that they have. Because as Mr. Theobald had said earlier, we've been engaged in conversations about ways to modernize and to update our processes, and that has been obviously ignored by this government.
And just as a follow-up then, so what do you do about this? Now you're talking about asking the public to join the ATA to stop this piece of legislation, but it's a majority government. They can do what they want pretty much. So how effective can you be trying to stop this next year?
It's a great question, Graham. One of the things that we need to consider is that we have a culture within our profession, within Alberta, of being one of the best performing education systems in the world. We have teachers, principals, central office staff who all work together to ensure that education is quality within our province. By saying that we're going to dismantle our association, we're going to break it apart, ruins that collegiality and that unification of profession that we've seen in Alberta. So we need to sit and talk with our members so that they can fully understand the implications of what this means for education in our province. Parents and the rest of the general public also need to understand what the implications of this are, because we've seen a very active, work by the government to dismantle public education. We've seen it in decisions made in the past in terms of budget decisions and cutting funding to students. We see students that are new to the system not being properly funded as they move through the system. We've seen a curriculum that has been delivered by this minister that has been widely panned by teachers, administrators, Indigenous, Francophone communities. We see decision after decision by this government that is eroding public education. The people should care about this, and this is just one more step that the government is taking in order to undermine public education in our province.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks, Graham. Let's go to Dylan Short next with Post Media. Dylan, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello, I think this is a question for Mr. Theobald, but I'm curious how many complaints you investigate, I guess, on average each year.
And so, Dylan, I can get you specific numbers. I don't mind looking them up. We don't have them at hand. I don't know if Dennis wants to comment generally, but we can definitely get the exact number for you.
Yes, we'll have to follow up. Remember, the complaints range from disagreements between colleagues all the way up to serious criminal matters. So there's a considerable range. The total number of complaints that we've been managing has been increasing, and the complexity of those complaints has been increasing. We report on this annually in our annual report, which is tabled in the legislature. And of course, all hearing reports are matters of the public record and are provided to individuals, including media, on demand. That is not true of the minister's own process, which is responsible for governing teachers who are not members of the Alberta Teachers Association because they are central office administrators, superintendents, deputy superintendents, private school teachers.
Follow up, Dylan?
Yeah, just to follow up, it sounds like, you know, there's concerns about this move, but a lot of the concerns sounds like it's almost concerns around what's being done with those charter schools, private schools, and First Nation schools where the minister or the ministry is already involved. I guess, is there some sort of common ground where there is a move where it's removed from the ATA, but it goes to some sort of other third party where this could work and it could be an improvement on what we're seeing today?
I think maybe we'll go to Dennis to start, and then I think Jason may want to jump in on this one as well.
If I can unpack that, I think there are two questions there. Bill 85, in terms of its content, really was going to have a much more dramatic effect upon the ministry processes than it was going to have on ours. For the first time, the ministry was going to be forced to be transparent. And that was one of the reasons why we actually thought it was a good idea, because the bill was going to force the ministry to come into line with our processes in terms of their accountability and transparency. Now, as to the broader question about creating a separate teachers college, it will be interesting to see, because Bill 85 is also intended to stand up the superintendent's organization with disciplinary roles independently. So is the College of Alberta School Superintendents going to maintain a role? We don't know. The other thing to note in all of this is that at the end of the day, there will be an Alberta Teachers Association. The ATA will be around. The problem is what will be its culture and what will be the culture of the education system in Alberta. The government seems to be intent upon creating a fairly narrowly focused teachers union, whereas right now we have an association that is very concerned in its objects with protecting the public interest, and that has expended considerable resources to that end in maintaining its professional conduct processes.
Jason, further on this question?
No, I don't think I would add to what Dennis had said. Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, we've gone through the first round, at least at this point. So if you have additional questions, please raise your hand. We'll get you back into the queue. And so let's go back to Janet French with CBC. Janet, go ahead.
Thanks so much. I believe it was Jason who referred, and possibly Dennis also referring to political motivations for this move. And I'm wondering if you can spell out for me, what do you think this government stands to gain politically from taking this function away from your organization? Is it the reduction in the amount of money you have, the number of people who work for the organization, who feel a loyalty to the organization?
I think this is probably a good question for Jason.
Well, yeah, and thank you for that, Janet. What I've seen over the last several months is a government that is putting forward things such as a curriculum that is quite unpopular. We're seeing other elements such as budget cuts. We've seen class sizes grow. We've seen an increase of standardized testing throughout this last year. We've seen a negligent approach to COVID-19 when we returned to school this fall. We've seen all of these things that have made this minister and this government hugely unpopular. And we know this through polling, through various media reports that are out there. What I see today's announcement coming on the heels when we've already been in discussions with government around Bill 85 and never had this come up before. What I saw today is people a minister, government, who are hugely unpopular, trying to distract us from the issues within education with this announcement that they did today. The fact of the matter remains, as I said at the beginning of this, we will not allow that distraction to happen. We'll work with this issue as it's come today, but we will also continue to press and advocate for a curriculum that is respectful and modern, and that creates a future that is better for our students, not one that is regressive in the terms of this curriculum. We will work to make sure that our students and our staffs are protected as well as they can be in our schools during a pandemic. And we will continue to press on as an association and not be distracted by this kind of announcement that you saw by the minister today.
Follow up, Janet?
Yes. Sorry, just unmuting myself. I just want to follow up on Graham's question. Is this strike worthy? I mean, we've got teachers saying like, I will never teach this curriculum in a classroom. No way. In combination, I don't think your collective agreement necessarily addresses these things, right? So is this like is this meandering into job action territory, and why or why not?
Well, thank you, Janet. And you indicated sort of in your question that strike would be around our collective agreement. And that would be something that any kind of job action would come out of that, whether or not you see a failure within the bargaining process. And that bargaining process is underway, and we have made commitments that we will not be bargaining within the media. When you do get to that point, whether or not you see bargaining fail or fall apart, the teachers of this province will make that determination about whether or not they want to move forward with strike action. By seeing a consistent attack by government through curriculum, through through the Education Act and the removal of LGBTQ rights for students, by budgets, by a long list of policy decisions made by this government. Teachers are feeling demoralized and disrespected in a way that I've never seen in my career. And today's announcement by the government during a pandemic, after the legislature has shut down for the fall, is just one more thing to demoralize and to disrespect the people who are working day in and day out with students across this province. And it is a shameful act by the Minister of Education, who should be supporting an education system in this province, not actively working to dismantle it. She should be supporting teachers in this province, and she is not doing that. And teachers see that for what it is, and they will not be distracted by that.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Janet, for the questions. We will wait to see if there are any more hands. Please let us know if you want a question. In the meantime, while we're waiting, I do have an answer to Dylan's earlier question, and I want to thank our staff member, Corey Hare, for digging this up quickly. 126 new requests for investigations of possible unprofessional conduct were received in 2020. 133 investigations were completed, 17 investigations were canceled when the complainants withdrew the request. And sufficient evidence to warrant hearings was found in 39 cases. That number actually comes from the annual report, which is tabled in the legislature, and we're working right now on the 2021 annual report. Let's go back to Dylan for another question.
Yeah, and thanks for grabbing those numbers. Appreciate it. I guess I just want to sort of follow up on what Janet was saying there. And I'm just curious, how much of today's concerns or issues just stem from the fact that it's been pretty much 2 years of we'll call them discussions between your side and the government side. I know it's kind of a tough question probably to answer, but how much of this stems from today and versus how much of this is just, I guess, another rung on the ladder?
Jason?
Well, you're right, Dylan. It is a tough question. We have seen since my time as president, one of the first things that I saw occur from this government was the passing of the Education Act, like I said before, that rolled back the rights and protections of 2S LGBTQ plus students within this province. The next thing I saw was a dismantling of a memorandum of understanding of working on a curriculum as partners, so that we could have a curriculum in our province that was not the hot mess that we see right now. This seems to be a pattern for the government to disregard the association, to disrespect teachers. And this just seems to be one more thing that government could have had the ability to sit down and talk with the association, such as other governments have done in the past, but failed to do so with this time around. So I think we're seeing a continuation of a disrespect of the profession by a government that is unwilling to listen to what the profession has to say.
Dylan, a follow-up?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Well, seeing no more questions, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, to thank you for your interest in the association's response to this important story. If you have any other follow-up questions or if things come up, please contact Mark Milne and he can arrange any questions to be answered. Thank you and have a good day.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.